This is part 2 of the Hawk story, Wingless. It had been 2 days since your date with Hawks. Over the next few days, you had a lot to think about, and hardly any time to do so. In the mornings, you rushed off to class with a slice of toast clamped in your mouth. Between classes, you wrote papers and crammed for exams. When your last class got out, late in the afternoon, you rushed off to Towers where you worked your butt off waiting tables to the best of your ability. By the time your shift would end, the sky glittered with misty stars through the city pollution, and it was all you could do to trudge home and collapse into bed. Your thoughts went wildest in the few minutes between crashing into bed and drifting off to sleep. Who was the person who had been spying on you? What was with Hawk's curiosity and why you hated your quirk? Who was Hawks, really? He always seemed so flamboyantly full of himself. Even if he was smart, it was easy to write him off as an egomaniac. But seeing his moments of chilling seriousness made you question how much of his devil-may-care attitude was just an act. You couldn't figure him out. And was he really going to call you? You still had his feather. You kept it wrapped in a tissue. You weren't sure how much he could sense through it, so wrapping it up made you feel a bit less awkward. You didn't want him to see you changing or anything like that. You kept it with you basically all the time, because it made you feel safer whenever you were walking the streets. But nothing happened, except for exhausting monotony. The weekend finally rolled around. You agreed to cover shifts for your coworker. It was as much for the extra hours as it was to help a friend. Everyone asked you to cover their shifts for that reason. You clocked in, walking briskly. The first few tables you seated were large groups with many people. You stopped short in slight surprise when you got to seat the next table. It was the regular who always showed up during your normal hours. He looked at you with bright black eyes, and you realized that your surprise was rudely visible. Hiding embarrassment, you said, "Right this way, sir." He followed politely. You observed him as he seated himself at the table. Ashy blonde hair, tall but with a slouch, and a jet black suit to match his hard black eyes. His name on the reservation was Mr. Tonica. He always ordered something different off the menu. In the past, you'd always wondered why he continued to come back if he didn't have a favorite dish. But now, you regarded him with different questions. "Do you know anyone with black eyes and blonde hair?" you remembered Hawks asking. You couldn't shake the thought. Were you getting ahead of yourself? There were probably a lot of people with black eyes and blonde hair. Mr. Tonica was just the only one you knew of. Also, Mr. Tonica had been a regular, and he had never done anything weird. You'd never been spied on before you spotted the suspicious stranger at Kiko. If weird events had just started, that didn't point to Tonica as a suspect. You shook your head. People were allowed to be eccentric. Towers had more than a few customers like that. There was nothing sinister about paying a fortune to frequent an expensive restaurant and ordering different dishes every time. Even as Mr. Tonica continually observed the room with bright black eyes, you firmly reminded yourself that eccentricity did not make Mr. Tonica a villain. As you ducked into the kitchens again, your coworker Mia called your name. "Casey, do you have a second?" "What's up?" you replied, walking up to notice a lanky teen standing beside her. He offered a self-conscious but charming smile. "Hi, I'm Riku. Nice to meet you." He bowed his head politely, making tendrils of fashionably messy auburn hair swish forward, then rose to reveal bright eyes of a matching auburn color. You looked at Mia questioningly. She looked puzzled. "You didn't know? Riku is new, and you've been put in charge of his training." You gaped at Mia, barely refraining from exclaiming, "What?" You closed your mouth with effort. Of course, you smiled. Come with me, Riku. I'll give you a tour. If Mia can watch my tables for a minute. You gave her a pointed glance. You got it, Mia agreed guiltily, flashing a relieved grin. Do you have experience as a waiter? You asked, expecting Riku to keep up. He hurried to your side. Of course. I worked at Tapas Molecular for 6 months. You glanced at him. Isn't that a bar? Again, the hesitant but charming smile. Yes. I see, you muttered resignedly. It was honestly a miracle that the kid had landed a job at Towers. He looked barely past teenage, and most of the waiters at Towers had much more relevant experience than he did. Hiring a former bar employee? What had they been thinking? All right, Riku. You turned to face him. We have a very different service system here at Towers. I'm going to need to train you from the ground up. Are you on board? Yes, Riku said, auburn eyes serious. You started by showing him around the storerooms. After showing him the break room and employee lockers, you showed him around the kitchens. You introduced him to many of the kitchen staff, all of them welcoming Riku warmly. But when you came to Ren, the chef abruptly turned his back. Riku looked worried. Did I do something wrong? You eyed Ren's unmoving back as the chef chopped vegetables with unnecessary ferocity and speed. Don't worry about it. He just doesn't like new people, but he'll warm up to you. Oh, Riku nodded doubtfully, then flashed a shy grin. Let's go to the front desk so I can show you our reservation system, you said wearily. You glanced over your shoulder at the chef's back as you led Riku away. You'd known Ren could be cold, but you hadn't realized he could display that kind of excessive contempt he'd just shown. Part of you was a bit hurt. Didn't Ren care that Riku was in your charge now? There was no call to act so immature. With effort, you shook off your annoyance and focused on being the perfect trainer. The kitchen doors swung closed behind you. You didn't hear from Hawks during the following week either. You weren't pining over that or anything. You were too busy. Riku's training was time-consuming. But he was a quick learner and a hard worker. Not to mention that he had the kind of likable personality which made it impossible to keep him at arm's length. Soon you felt as friendly towards him as you were to any of your coworker friends. You even enjoyed bragging about him, jokingly, to the others. Only one person didn't warm up to Riku, Ren. The chef continued to treat Riku with chilling dislike. You even saw Ren silently glowering at the boy a couple times. It confused you. Riku had done nothing wrong. Normally Ren acknowledged a newcomer's efforts after a while. But if anything, Ren's dislike seemed to be growing. Ren had never minded it when anyone else had grown popular. Try as you might, you couldn't think of a single plausible explanation for Ren's attitude, so you decided to ignore it. As you slipped into your pajamas at the end of another long day, a tissue fell out of your pocket. It took your tired mind a moment to remember that it contained the feather from Hawks. He still hadn't called you. You picked it up, examining it wearily. Well, Hawks, I guess you've been pretty busy with work too, haven't you? You muttered. You set the feather down on your dresser, climbing into bed. Your phone went off right as your head hit the pillow. With effort, you sat up and looked at your screen glowing in the dark. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "You got that right." You stared at the text fuzzily, then realized with a jolt. "Hawks?" you texted back. The ding of a reply came at once. "The one and only. Did you miss me?" You flushed, embarrassed. He'd heard your sleepy mutters about him being busy. Right, he said he'd pay attention if you ever said his name. The text went from "received just now" to "1 minute ago." You sighed, finally responding with, "Sorry, I didn't mean to use the feather. Good luck on your work." Tossing the phone aside, you closed your tired eyes and crashed into your pillow. You faintly heard your phone ding with a text, but sleep overcame you. You woke sometime during the night, feeling refreshed and clear-headed. Gray-blue light filtered across the ceiling of the dark room. There were still a few more hours before it was time to get up, and you couldn't afford to miss sleep. You'd get water, then go back to bed. You slid your feet down onto the floor and wobbled upright, rubbing your eyes. But your heart flew to your throat when you saw a silhouette in your window. A winged figure. Hawks? He had his back to you, looking out at the city from the vantage of the window ledge. He was outside, the window was still closed. The thumping of your heart in your ears gradually faded. You walked over, unlatching the window and sliding it open. Hawks glanced over his shoulder, raising his eyebrows in mild surprise. Up so early? You stared at him in amazement. How could he be so casual about sitting outside a girl's bedroom window in the AM hours? He was unbelievable. "What are you doing here?" you demanded. "Didn't you get my text?" he asked innocently. You grabbed your phone from the dresser. "On patrol. I'll probably swing by," the message read, dating several hours ago. "So, you swung by, you saw me asleep, and you decided to stay?" You shot him a look reserved for creeps. Hawks was unfazedly cheerful. "This spot has a good vantage point for patrolling. I can see a lot of common crime sites from here." You craned your neck, examining the nighttime cityscape below. "Really? Where are the crime sites?" Hawks hesitated for a split second, then made up his mind. "Right. You ought to know so you can avoid those places. If you climb up here, I'll show you." You looked at his precarious sitting situation warily. The ledge wasn't very wide. "I don't know. I won't let you fall." Hawks offered his hand. You took it hesitantly, then gasped as he yanked you off your feet. You caught a dizzying glimpse of window lights far, far below as he swung you gently down next to him. "My life just flashed before my eyes," you muttered, sitting on the window ledge with mounting alarm. The ground was so far away. Hawks wrapped his arm around you securely, and you stopped wobbling. You got the impression that it would take significant force to break free and fall from that firm hold, so you relaxed slightly. The way you relax when you're in a car crash, but you're wearing your seatbelt. You still clung to Hawk's arm. "You good?" Hawks asked, amusement creeping into his tone. His insufferable ego snapped you out of your fear. "Of course," you said with forced aloofness. Hawk's eyes flashed in amusement, but he turned his attention to pointing out crime spots with his free hand. It was a bit unnerving to see that some of the crime hotspots were places that you walked next to all the time. Of course, a lot of it was common sense. Avoid places with poor lighting, don't wander into narrow alleys or under bridges. But Hawks was able to tell you more than that as well. He knew where different gang territories ended and began, and which gangs were more dangerous. He knew places that drug dealers frequented, and where dangerous drunks tended to cause trouble. He warned you about certain houses or apartments that should be avoided. The night city seemed even darker and more threatening than when you'd first gazed at it. It was different, seeing it through Hawk's eyes. You wondered if it took a toll on him. The same way that you were depending on him for a sense of safety from his arm around you. The entire city depended on him for a sense of safety under the spread of his wings. No pressure, you grimaced at the thought. Hawk stopped short in his concise explanation of why the park 2 streets down should be avoided. "Are you all right? Want to talk about something else?" You hadn't known his voice could sound that gentle. "I'm fine," you assured. "I was just thinking about how it must be hard being a hero." Hawks was silent for once. He replied just when you started to think he wouldn't. "Sometimes. he admitted. You glanced sideways at him, the cityscape reflected within his gold eyes. I can tell what you're thinking. I know I have a dark view of society. More than anything, I want a world where heroes have too much time on their hands. He smiled ironically. Is that possible? Hawks turned his gaze to you. You saw his pain, his steely resolve, his uncertainty. It was gone in a flash. If I'm fast enough, he winked. The insane thing is, although you're joking, I feel like you actually mean that, you muttered. Hawks steered the conversation away from himself. So, Casey, about your quirk complex. You stiffened. Hawks, as someone whose entire personality is just an act, you could never understand. You felt bad immediately. It was meant to sting. But Hawks didn't seem to care. Try me, he countered lazily. You think I won't understand? I know you won't. I might surprise you. You felt a mounting frustration. All right, Hawks. Fine. Under one condition. Hawks waited patiently. Never, ever ask me to use my quirk. Deal. Hawks didn't even pause to think about it. He waited for you to talk, and eventually, you did. You told him about high school. You told him about pretending to be someone you weren't. Someone prettier. Someone who always said what people wanted to hear. Someone admired. You told him about how you'd finally shown your real self without your quirk, and how your friends had abandoned you. They had hated you. You didn't go into detail. You simply concluded that you never wanted to make people think you were better than you were again. Ever. You never wanted to act like someone you weren't, and that's exactly what your quirk did. Using it was a painful reminder of how your fake reality had crashed and burned in high school. So, do you really understand? You huddled on the window ledge, feeling small and cold despite Hawk's arm around you. Hawks paused. Yes, I do. Really? You felt a twinge of skepticism. I understand that you fell in with the wrong crowd, and it's negatively affected you. His tone was light but clipped, and there was a hard set to his jaw. You stared at him. Are you angry? You asked, bewildered. Hawks made his expression relax. Let's just say, I don't care for your high school buddies. You shrugged. If that's how you see it. As long as you don't keep bringing up my quirk. Casey. Hawks looked at you piercingly. For the record, it's okay to show different people different sides of yourself, and put your best foot forward. Every side of you is part of the real you. You felt distinctly uncomfortable. Look, Hawks, I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. I need sleep. Mind letting me down? Who's Hawks? He tilted his head in puzzlement. He was infuriating. Please, Kago, you corrected. Hawks flashed a grin. As you wish. Next time, we can go flying. You glanced at the dizzying height and shuddered. I don't think so. Hawks laughed. You're missing out, he called, voice dropping away as he launched himself from your window ledge. His wings caught the air in an even soar and reflected the light from the city below and the upcoming dawn. I'll leave the flying to the people with wings, you muttered, raising an amused eyebrow. Everyone noticed your good mood at work the next day. Something good happened, Casey? Riku asked, grinning. You smiled fondly at your trainee. He was on his way to becoming an impeccable waiter, and the guests loved his shy, charming smile. Ren was a fool. Thought of the chef flitted through your head and dissipated without bothering you. You grinned back at Riku. You could say that. The two of you arranged dishes of food onto the cart in friendly silence, although Riku's eyes danced with questions. Say, Riku, you looked at the boy curiously. Why did you want to work at Towers? Riku laughed self-consciously. This is where I can learn from the best, of course. He gave you a twinkle-eyed glance. Flattery won't work on me, you persisted, knowing full well that wasn't true. It probably won't work, but it's hard to stay stern. Had Riku always been this silver-tongued? Well, Riku sobered. My sister has expensive health issues, so you could say that the higher salary was part of my motivation. I'm sorry, you responded, taken aback. I didn't mean to pry. It's all right, Casey. An ironic smile ghosted over his lips. You've done nothing wrong. You knitted your brows, confused by his tone. But then he was whisking the cart away, laughing at you, because you were thrown off balance by not being able to lean on it anymore. Cheeky youngster. You shook your fist after him in mock anger. Your busy routine continued with one difference. Hawks would often stop by on night patrol. Sometimes he would stop by for a few nights running. Sometimes he'd be mysteriously gone for a week at a time. You didn't sit on the window ledge with him anymore. Despite Hawk's confidence to keep you from falling, you firmly refused to dance with death and great heights. But you would lean forward, resting your elbows on the window ledge and letting the cool night air ruffle your hair as Hawk sat beside you. You and him exchanged banter, as well as occasional deeper conversation. It was surprisingly easy to discuss anything with him. As long as he didn't pry into your unwillingness to talk about your quirk, and as long as you didn't pry into his secret work, talking was easy. You started to suspect that Hawks was involved more in intelligence work than you'd first assumed. You also started to pick up on his stiff tone whenever he mentioned the agency, the Public Safety Commission, that he worked for. He never said that he felt caged by his work life, but it was obvious. You wondered why he didn't leave. Successful as he was, he would have plenty of agencies begging to sign him on. Your interaction with Hawks was starting to change you, subtly but surely. His playfulness was rubbing off on you, and his ideas were working their way into your mind. You started adapting to social settings rather than using bluntness in every situation. You dug out your bag of makeup and started wearing it more. It was still your face, just cast in a flattering light. Maybe you really could put your best foot forward without becoming something fake. A fragile thread of hope, of new philosophy, twined between you and the future, pulling you forward. You thought about the way you were changing as you walked home in the rain. A poster caught your eye. It advertised an art exhibition. You stopped and touched the glossy damp paper. Pointillism. Your father was a great lover of art exhibitions, so you knew how pointillism worked. At first glance, the poster showed a misty cityscape with blue sky and water, rosy buildings and green trees. But examined closer, it was made of millions of pricks of seemingly unrelated color. The blue water contained dots of green, purple, and even red. Getting to know Hawks was like trying to see the whole picture, just by looking at the individual dots of paint. He was hard to read. He was a show-off. He was dramatic. But that was just an act. A means to an end. What made Hawks real wasn't the way he presented himself. His true colors were only shown in his constant, unflagging commitment to his goals. He'd say anything, wear any mask, to paint the picture of a city where, in his words, heroes had too much time on their hands. You stepped back from the poster, seeing the individual dots blend away and a beautiful city come into focus. Tears pricked at your eyes, mixing with the rain. You didn't see Hawks that night, or the next. He must have been busy with secret missions. In a way, you were glad. What were you supposed to say? I get it now? I understand you now? Sorry for calling you fake? No way. He could stay away and save you the awkwardness. You were almost late for work the next day. You'd run into an old and very chatty friend, and by the time you waved goodbye, you knew you'd have to sprint to clock in on time. You burst into the doors of Towers, very out of breath, but somehow right on time. You glanced around for Riku. Ren, have you seen Riku? He's out there waiting on that regular customer, Ren growled, gesturing with his knife. Mr. Tanaka? You remembered the ash blonde with dark eyes. Right, he's fully trained now. Good for him. You glanced through the kitchen doors. Seeing Riku's auburn hairs, he dipped his head in a polite bow to Mr. Tanaka before turning back to the kitchens. You and Riku locked eyes for a startling instant, and you ducked guiltily. You weren't sure why. You were just supervising. But you had the odd sense that you'd spied on something private. Maybe it had been the uncharacteristic look in Riku's eyes. He came in the doors and glanced at you quizzically. All right, Casey? Of course. You laughed at his polite confusion. Keep up the work, Riku. Riku smiled and hurried off. He noticed another waiter struggling to carry several dishes and rushed in smoothly to lend a hand. Maybe it was all in your head. You were working a double shift, late into the night since you'd agreed to cover for someone. You might have a headache tomorrow, but it'd be good for your paycheck. You noticed Riku wheeling a laden food cart out of the kitchens as the night waned on. It was odd. He always chose to go out that door, through a windowed side room which adjoined the main dining area as well as the office. Most waiters took the door that led straight into the dining area. A burst of sound, frying, chopping, dishes clattering, always washed through whenever the doors opened. Did Riku take the side door to avoid disturbing the guests? You swung open the side door curiously. It took you a moment to register what you saw. Riku had an open packet in his hand, and was efficiently tapping out a fine dust of something onto several of the dishes. He folded the packet and tucked it into his pocket. As he turned, his eyes locked with yours. He froze, thoughts flashing through his wide eyes. Riku? You asked unsteadily. What are you doing? Casey. You saw that ironic smile of his again. This is bad timing. He pulled out a dart gun from his pocket and leveled it at you. Riku! Wait! You gasped, holding your hands up and stumbling backwards. You tripped, falling on your back into the office room. The mistake saved you. A dart flew harmlessly over your head. You scurried backward, losing a shoe, and bumped into the desk. Someone was already in the office. A very familiar, regular customer. His biting dark eyes took in your terror as he grabbed your shoulders, keeping you still. The eccentric Mr. Tanaka. You'd stumbled away from one danger and right into another. Hawks! Keiko! You screamed. Riku stepped through the door. That couldn't be Riku. He was too cold, too serious, calculating even. The auburn hair and eyes were the same, but nothing else was. He shut and locked the office door behind him. What's going on? Riku, what are you and Mr. Tanaka doing here at Towers? Stall. You had to stall. Isn't it obvious? Riku smiled without humor. Lots of important people dine here. Lots of people who are on our hit list. You gaped as you put two and two together. You're assassins? Of course, Mr. Tanaka said calmly, as though talking about the weather. I see, you muttered. Mr. Tanaka started eating here 6 months before Riku came to work. That means Riku started getting qualifying experience at Tappa's Molecular at the same time. This was your goal all along, Riku. And what was your job, Mr. Tanaka? Vanguard? Scout? Tanaka laughed coldly. Even leaders get involved when the stakes are high. Sir, Riku nodded to Tanaka respectfully. It all made sense now. Mr. Tanaka's money, his observing gaze, his eccentricity, his motive for always coming back. The reason he'd hidden when you and Hawks had run into him at Kiko. "How are you going to cover up my death?" you demanded. "An unfortunate tale, really," Tanaka said sympathetically. His smooth, calm voice made your skin crawl. "An overworked student employee couldn't take the stress and pressure anymore. It's quite the fall from the top of towers." Your heartbeat pounded in your ears. "Riku! Riku, don't do this." "I don't want this either, Casey." His auburn eyes flashed with pain. "But you have to disappear." "What would your sister say?" Riku's eyes looked darker as he took aim again. "Goodbye, Casey." Suddenly, a flash of red knifed out of your pocket and slammed Riku against the wall. Mr. Tanaka's grip on your shoulder went slack in surprise, and you took advantage by twisting away. You immediately activated your quirk. With a growl and a burst of speed, Riku reopened the door and slammed it down on Hawk's feather, trapping it. But when he turned back to the room, his eyes went wide. "Tranquilize her," Mr. Tanaka ordered, pointing at you. His voice overlapped with your identical imitation of his voice. Your pointing finger mirrored his. Riku leveled his dart gun, eyes uncertain as he shifted his aim between the two identical images of his boss. Mr. Tanaka's expression darkened at the dilemma. You couldn't give him the chance to talk too much, or your cover would be blown. Your only chance was to attack. You rushed him, going for his knees like your mom, a former rugby player, had taught you. Riku watched helplessly as both of you went down, rolling and wrestling. Mr. Tanaka was stronger, but you were fighting for your life, using hysterical strength you wouldn't have thought possible. Still, you were starting to lose. He blacked your eye and bent your arm at an unnatural angle. Your real voice tore out of your throat in a scream. You let the charade of your quirk drop in a fizz of pain as Mr. Tanaka furiously kicked you in the stomach. And then, the glass-windowed wall exploded. Hawks had arrived. He sent Mr. Tanaka flying into the filing cabinets with a single devastating punch. Mr. Tanaka didn't move. He bent over you, brows furrowed. Casey, can you hear me?" "Look out!" you hissed. Hawk stared in shock as a feathered dart blossomed from his arm, then grimaced and slumped against the vertical supports of the shattered window. "Careless of me," he slurred, eyelids fluttering. Riku looked down at the two of you, hands shaking, eyes wild. The dart gun clattered onto the floor. "Riku," you spoke through gritted teeth. "Do you hear the sirens? Give up." "Never!" Riku yelled wildly. He shoved you. You tipped backwards into stomach-dropping empty air and watched as the lit rims of towers seemed to fly away from you at reckless speed. You were falling. You squeezed your eyes shut, feeling the cold night air knife across your skin. Suddenly, a hot, crushing embrace pulled you in. You knew it was Hawks, even before you opened your eyes to see his intense focus, his gold eyes on the ground below. His wings angled drunkenly, shifting without strength as he tried to glide out of the uncontrolled freefall. "Look out!" you gasped for the second time. You remembered the ground flinging itself upwards towards you, and then stillness. Alive. You had survived. Arms and wings wrapped around you protectively. Hawks had shielded you. Hawks, who now lay on the shattered cement, utterly still, feathered darts still sprouting from his arm. You checked for a sign of life, lowering your cheek next to his face to see if you could detect breathing. "We really do make a good team," he whispered unexpectedly, his breath brushing your face. Irritation and relief made you snappy. "We would if you would listen to me. Do you always let yourself get hit by darts?" He laughed until a rattling cough cut him off. "Touché," he agreed, smirking, and then he blacked out. 2 days later, you entered Hawk's hospital room. Hawks glanced over at you, his bored expression lighting up immediately. You couldn't help smiling. "Why didn't you visit sooner?" he asked plaintively. You raised an eyebrow sarcastically. "If you weren't so secretive about your relationships, they wouldn't have kept me out." Hawk sobered unexpectedly. "Come here, Casey. I need to make sure you're all in one piece." "You're the injured one," you scoffed, walking over all the same. He pulled you down to sit on the hospital bed, wrapping his arms around you and resting his chin on top of your head, then sighed contentedly. You smiled, knowing he couldn't see. He was like a puppy sometimes. "Casey," Hawk said, voice uncharacteristically sober, "you realize that I have enemies, right?" You shrugged. "Of course you do. You're the most annoying hero in the city." "Of course you do. You're the most annoying hero in the city." He laughed, but his amusement quickly faded. "If they find out that I'm dating you, you'll become a target." You considered silently, then reached up and wrapped your arm around his arms. "Then I'll just have to get better at self-defense. With your help. Secrets can't keep forever." Hawks exhaled. "I know," he admitted grudgingly, "but I don't like it." You frowned. "You know what I don't like? How weak I am." "You? Weak?" You could sense Hawk's smirk, even without seeing him. "Yes, I am," you insisted. "I was no match for Mr. Tonica, or whatever his real name was. I've been thinking. I can't even do a push-up, Kago. It frustrates me. I know I'm small and I might not be the strongest person anyways. I can accept that I have limits, but I can't accept that I haven't even been trying to get strong." "You didn't have a reason before," Hawks pointed out. "Well, now I do," you huffed. Hawks stroked your hair reassuringly. "Want to work out together? We could go to the gym." "As a date?" "Obviously," Hawks said, flicking your nose. You smiled, feeling absurdly pleased. "I'd like that." "All right," Hawk sounded mock serious. "I'm not going easy on you. I take the role of personal trainer very seriously." "Bring it on," you challenged. Hawks laughed, pulling you against him even more. "Kago?" "Yeah?" "What happened to Riku?" "That assassin who pushed you off of a skyscraper?" Hawks asked, playfulness abruptly gone. "Yes." "He's in prison for attempted murder. In addition to trying to kill you." Hawk's slightly tighter grip was the only sign of his emotions. "He gave several people a poison that takes 3 weeks to take effect. All of his assassination targets were found, and the antidote was administered to them, so he failed. Police are still unraveling everything about the assassination organization and who their employer was. That Mr. Tonica escaped. I'll be sent to look into it as soon as I've recovered." "I see." You fingered some of his bandages thoughtfully. "Could I possibly get the address to the hospital where his sister is staying?" "Why do you care?" Hawks asked icily. "He tried to kill you." "Yes, but..." You paused, trying to articulate what you felt. "Kago, you know how you said that people have different sides that they show at different times? But it's all part of the real them?" Hawks was silent. "He's in pain," you continued, "and misguided. But everything he's doing is for his sister's sake. The kindness and thoughtfulness that I saw, I don't think he could have faked that." You shivered. "It scares me, Kago. That people could be so complicated. I feel as though I can't trust my first impressions anymore, but I'm trying to face the complexity head-on instead of simplifying it." Hawk's voice caught. "I respect that. I don't like how kind you're being, but I do respect it. You taught me that, you teased. That's the worst part, Hawks sighed. You've surpassed me, Casey. I don't deserve you. You struggled out of his arms, standing. Don't leave yet. Hawks gave you a dramatically forlorn look that had you smothering a chuckle. Hawks, I wanted to tell you thanks. You gave him a kiss on the cheek. He stared at you in playful astonishment. For what? Saving you? No, not just for saving me. For giving me wings. He chuckled softly. You waited a second, enjoying his smile. Also, Hawks, I have some news. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. Let's hear it. Your agency approached me. Apparently they think that my quirk would be very good for some of the work they do. And I don't even have to go to a hero training school. Hawk's thunderstruck expression was priceless. He stumbled out of bed, wincing. Don't, you protested. You're supposed to be in bed. I'm fine, just a couple broken ribs, he said dismissively. Casey, what are you thinking? You hadn't anticipated the extent of his reaction. I want to work with you, Kago. It'll help me get stronger. Emotions warred on Hawk's face. Don't you realize what you've done? You've just signed your life away. I thought you were too smart for that. I know, you said, pushing all doubts aside. But it's my turn to be your hero. This is the only way I can understand what you've gotten yourself into. The only way I can get stronger. You can't change my mind. Anger and admiration warred on Hawk's face, then released in a sigh. He stepped forward, ignoring the pain in his ribs as he embraced you. All right, then. I believe you. You really have grown wings, and not even I can stop you. Kago, you said. One more thing. I don't mind using my quirk anymore. You shifted to the appearance of the Hero Public Safety Commission president, Hawk's boss, making Hawks pull back from you in shock at the sudden appearance of his boss. You laughed in your own voice and ran out. Come back here, President, he shouted teasingly. Don't order me around, subordinate, you yelled back. Somewhere in the city, the real Public Safety Commission president shivered with a sudden chill. Hawk's agency had no idea how much more chaotic their organization had just become, or what a legendary team they'd just gained. I hope you enjoyed this story. I'm still working on the Eiko Aizawa story behind the scenes. Meanwhile, I'll be putting out other stories soon. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want to know when they're up. Take care, and I'll see you later.
Eyes in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you?